I have presided over murder trials, corporate fraud cases, bitter custody battles, and disputes that destroyed entire families. After more than 20 years on the bench, I believe there was very little left that could surprise me. I was wrong, because one case still follows me. One case still returns to my mind when the courthouse is empty and the halls have fallen silent. It involved a woman named Melissa Grant, a woman many people in her town described as a classic fat Karen. She was loud, demanding, entitled, and absolutely convinced that the rules applied to everyone except her. The day she walked into my courtroom, she wore a smile that suggested she had already won. 5 hours later, that smile would be gone. And 5 minutes after one particular warning, her entire world would begin collapsing. Before we go any further, make sure you have subscribed to this channel for more powerful courtroom stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Also, comment below and tell us where you are watching this video from. Now, let me take you back to where this case truly began. The morning Melissa Grant entered my courtroom, I noticed her immediately. Not because of her appearance, not because of her expensive clothes, not even because of the way she carried herself. I noticed her because she was laughing. That might not sound unusual. But believe me, people involved in high-stakes lawsuits rarely laugh before proceedings begin, especially when millions of dollars and their reputation are on the line. Yet Melissa seemed entertained, as if the entire situation was beneath her, as if she were attending a performance rather than participating in a legal battle. I remember watching her whisper something to her attorney. Both of them smiled. Meanwhile, across the aisle sat Judy Harper, and the contrast between those two women could not have been greater. Judy looked exhausted, not physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that develops after months of stress, months of uncertainty, months of wondering whether anyone will believe your side of the story. She held a worn folder tightly against her chest. Inside that folder were photographs, documents, medical records, letters, and pieces of evidence that represented the last chance she had to reclaim what she believed had been stolen from her. At that moment, nobody in the gallery understood the full story. Most spectators thought they were watching an ordinary property dispute. They were wrong, very wrong, because beneath the legal paperwork was something far darker, something involving trust, manipulation, and betrayal. In my experience, the most dangerous people are not always the loudest. They are not always the most aggressive. Often, the most dangerous people are those who convince others to trust them completely, then use that trust as a weapon. As proceedings began, I reviewed the file one final time. The case centered around a family home, a modest property that had belonged to Judy's family for nearly 70 years. 3 generations had lived there. Birthdays had been celebrated there. Children had grown up there. Memories had been built there. To most people, it was just a house. To Judy, it was a lifetime. According to court records, ownership of that home had been transferred to Melissa Grant, legally, properly documented, officially recorded, at least on paper. Melissa's legal team insisted everything had been done correctly. They argued that Judy had willingly signed every document, agreed to every condition, understood every consequence, case closed, civil, or so they claimed. Judy's version of events painted a completely different picture. According to her, Melissa had not taken the house through force. She had taken it through manipulation. The alleged scheme began almost 2 years earlier. Judy had suffered several medical emergencies. Hospital bills piled up, debt increased, financial pressure mounted, and during that difficult period, Melissa entered her life. At first, she appeared helpful, supportive, generous, the perfect friend. That detail caught my attention. because I have learned something during my years as a judge. Many victims never realize they are being manipulated until it is far too late. Real manipulation rarely begins with threats. It begins with kindness. The prosecutor began outlining Judy's allegations. As he spoke, Melissa appeared bored. She checked her phone repeatedly, rolled her eyes, occasionally exchanged amused looks with her attorney. Those small actions may seem insignificant, but juries notice everything, and so do judges. The way people behave when they believe nobody is paying attention often reveals their true character. Then Judy was called to the witness stand. The courtroom grew quiet. She walked slowly, carefully, as though every step carried emotional weight. After taking her oath, she looked toward the jury. Then she began telling her story. She described meeting Melissa. She described the friendship that followed, the lunches, the conversations, the promises, the support. Melissa had offered advice during difficult times, help with paperwork, guidance regarding finances. According to Judy, she trusted Melissa completely. And that's when I noticed something interesting. Melissa stopped smiling, not entirely, just enough. Because the word trust had suddenly become important, Judy continued. She explained how Melissa repeatedly reassured her that certain documents were designed to protect her home, to help her, to buy time while she recovered financially. The jury listened carefully. Several jurors took detailed notes. Others watched Judy without blinking, and throughout the testimony, I kept observing Melissa. Her reactions fascinated me. When certain details were mentioned, she appeared confident. When others surfaced, she became noticeably tense. Experienced judges learned to recognize those shifts. Then Judy revealed something that changed the atmosphere completely. She claimed she did not realize ownership of her home had been transferred until months later. The gallery murmured. I immediately restored order, but the reaction was understandable. It was a shocking allegation. The defense objected, the attorneys argued, the jury listened, and the tension continued building. Hour by hour, piece by piece. Then Judy said something I will never forget. She looked directly across the courtroom, directly at Melissa. And for a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence felt heavy, almost uncomfortable. Finally, Judy broke it. Her voice was calm, much calmer than I expected. Melissa, she said. The courtroom became completely silent. You still have time. I remember seeing several jurors glance toward Melissa. Nobody understood what Judy meant. Not yet, Judy continued. You know what happened. Still calm, still controlled. You know the truth. For several seconds, Melissa simply stared back at her. Then she laughed. A short laugh, a dismissive laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they believe they are untouchable. The gallery reacted immediately. Several spectators exchanged looks. Even some jurors appeared surprised. And that was when Judy said 6 words that would change everything. 6 words that instantly wiped the smile from Melissa's face. 6 words that I still remember years later. You haven't seen the new evidence. The transformation was immediate. Melissa's laughter stopped. Her expression changed. And for the first time all day, I saw fear, real fear, not panic, not nervousness, fear. The kind of fear people experience when they suddenly realize a secret they thought was buried may not be buried after all. At that moment, I had no idea what evidence Judy was referring to. But Melissa clearly did. And what happened over the next few hours would become one of the most unforgettable courtroom battles of my entire career. Because hidden inside a sealed evidence envelope sitting quietly on a table was something capable of destroying everything Melissa Grant had built, and she knew it. The moment Judy mentioned new evidence, I noticed something that most people in the courtroom missed. Melissa Grant stopped moving. Not for long. Only a second or two. But after decades on the bench, I had learned that some of the most important courtroom moments last less than a heartbeat. A witness hesitates, a defendant looks away, an attorney suddenly changes strategy. Those tiny moments often reveal more than hours of testimony. And Melissa's reaction told me one thing immediately. Whatever was inside that evidence envelope, she was worried about it, very worried. The remainder of the morning session felt different. The confidence Melissa had displayed when she first entered the courtroom was still there, but cracks were beginning to appear, small cracks, the kind people try desperately to hide. Her attorney leaned toward her repeatedly, whispering, taking notes, reviewing documents. That alone wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the frequency. Something had changed. The plaintiff's attorney requested permission to introduce several exhibits before unveiling the new evidence. At first glance, the document seemed ordinary, 8mouse.txt messages, phone records, financial statements, nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, at least not individually. But great trial lawyers understand something. A powerful case is rarely built with one piece of evidence. It's built with many pieces that slowly connect together, like a puzzle. And that was exactly what the jury was beginning to see. The attorney projected a timeline onto the courtroom screen. I watched the jurors carefully. Several leaned forward. Others stopped taking notes entirely and simply stared. The timeline began 2 years earlier, the period when Judy first encountered financial hardship, hospital visits, medical debt, missed payments, collection notices, and then Melissa Grant appeared. At first, the timeline painted her as a hero, helping Judy understand paperwork, offering financial advice, checking in regularly, supporting her during difficult times. If the timeline had ended there, Melissa would have looked like a saint. But it didn't end there. The attorney continued moving forward month by month, and a pattern slowly emerged. The more dependent Judy became on Melissa's advice, the more influence Melissa seemed to gain over Judy's decisions. The jury noticed it. Yeah. I noticed it. Even Melissa appeared uncomfortable watching it unfold. Then came the emails. The first several messages seemed harmless, friendly, supportive, encouraging. Melissa repeatedly assured Judy she would help protect the family home. She promised she would help solve the financial problems. She repeatedly encouraged Judy not to panic. On the surface, everything looked admirable. But then the attorney began highlighting specific phrases, specific wording, specific moments. And suddenly, those messages looked different. One email stood out. Judy had asked whether she should hire an independent attorney to review paperwork related to the property. Melissa's response appeared on the screen. You don't need another lawyer involved. They'll only make things more complicated. The jury immediately began writing notes. Another email followed. This time, Judy asked whether she should seek outside financial advice. Melissa responded, "You can trust me. I'm looking out for you." Again, trust. That word kept appearing. And every time it appeared, I saw Melissa's expression tighten slightly. The attorney moved through dozens of communications. One after another, a pattern formed. Whenever Judy considered getting independent advice, Melissa discouraged it. Whenever Judy expressed confusion, Melissa reassured her. Whenever Judy hesitated, Melissa encouraged her to move forward. None of those actions were necessarily illegal, but together they created a troubling picture, a picture of influence, control, dependence. Then the attorney introduced phone records, hundreds of calls, late-night conversations, long discussions lasting hours. The timing was remarkable. Many of the calls occurred immediately before major financial decisions. Others happened shortly before documents were signed. The attorney displayed the call logs beside the timeline. The visual effect was powerful. The jury could literally see the relationship evolving. The defense attempted to challenge the significance. They argued that friends talk frequently, which was true. But frequency wasn't the only issue. Timing mattered, and timing can tell stories that words never will. As the afternoon session began, the plaintiff's attorney called another witness, a financial consultant named Robert Hayes. Robert wasn't charismatic, he wasn't dramatic, and that actually made him more effective. Jurors often trust witnesses who simply present facts without trying to impress anyone. Robert reviewed property valuations, market assessments, comparable sales. And eventually, he reached a conclusion that changed the atmosphere in the room. According to his analysis, Judy's family home had been worth significantly more than the amount involved in the transfer. Significantly more. The difference wasn't minor. It was substantial. Several jurors exchanged glances. Melissa stared straight ahead. Robert continued. The valuation used during the transfer appeared unusually low compared to multiple independent assessments conducted around the same period. Again, not definitive proof of wrongdoing. But another troubling piece of the puzzle, another question, another concern, then came cross-examination. Melissa's attorney challenged Robert aggressively, questioning his assumptions, his calculations, his methodology. For a while, the defense gained some momentum, and I could see Melissa beginning to relax, but only temporarily, because the plaintiff's attorney wasn't finished. Not even close. The final witness of the day was a former administrative assistant who had worked for a company connected to Melissa's real estate dealings. Her testimony wasn't explosive. In fact, much of it seemed routine. Yet something about her demeanor caught my attention. She appeared nervous, not because she was lying, because she clearly didn't want to be there. People often misunderstand nervous witnesses. Sometimes nervousness indicates deception. Other times it indicates fear. And this witness looked afraid. She testified about meetings, patri discussions, investment opportunities, business planning. Then she mentioned something unexpected, a meeting that had occurred weeks before Judy signed the transfer documents. The room became noticeably quieter. The witness recalled hearing discussions about a property that matched the description of Judy's family home. The timing immediately caught everyone's attention because, according to Judy's allegations, she had not yet understood what was happening to her property at that stage. Yet discussions about future plans for the property were allegedly already occurring. The defense objected repeatedly. Some objections were sustained. Others were overruled. But the jury had heard enough to raise questions. And questions can be dangerous, especially when answers are difficult to provide. By late afternoon, the tension inside the courtroom had become almost tangible. The evidence envelope remained unopened, sitting quietly on the plaintiff's table, waiting. Its mere presence seemed to affect everyone, especially Melissa. I watched her glance toward it several times throughout the day, more times than she probably realized. People tend to look toward the things they fear. Eventually, the plaintiff's attorney stood and approached the bench. He requested permission to introduce the evidence the following morning. The defense immediately objected. Desultory arguments followed. Legal issues had to be addressed. Procedural questions had to be resolved. By the time court adjourned for the day, no final ruling had been made. But something interesting happened as people began leaving. Judy gathered her papers quietly. Her expression remained calm. Melissa, however, appeared agitated, frustrated, distracted. And as she walked out of the courtroom, I noticed her looking back one final time toward that sealed envelope, just once. But it was enough, because in that moment, I became convinced of something. Whatever was inside that envelope wasn't simply another document. It wasn't another email. It wasn't another valuation report. It was something much bigger. Something powerful enough to frighten a woman who had spent the entire trial acting as though she had nothing to fear. And the next morning, when that envelope was finally opened, the entire direction of the case would change. What emerged from inside would leave the jury stunned, the gallery speechless, and Melissa Grant fighting to hold together a story that was about to fall apart piece by piece. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. Some cases stay with a judge, not because they are famous, not because they involve celebrities, but because something about them feels unfinished. This was one of those cases. As I reviewed my notes from the previous day, I kept returning to the same question. Why had Melissa Grant reacted so strongly to the mention of new evidence? If she truly believed she had done nothing wrong, why did a single sentence from Judy Harper affect her so deeply? The answer, I suspected, was sitting inside that sealed envelope, waiting. When court began, the atmosphere felt completely different from the previous day. Word had spread, the public gallery filled quickly. Several legal observers had returned. Even some attorneys from unrelated courtrooms found reasons to stop by. They sensed something important was about to happen, and they were right. Melissa entered looking noticeably different. The confidence was still there, but it wasn't as natural. It looked forced, manufactured, like someone trying very hard to appear calm. Judy entered a few minutes later. Unlike Melissa, she seemed strangely at peace, not happy, not excited, just calm. And that contrast immediately caught my attention. Years on the bench have taught me something. People often become calmer when they know the truth is finally about to surface. The plaintiff's attorney stood shortly after proceedings began. He approached the evidence table, picked up the envelope. And for the first time since the trial began, I noticed Melissa physically tense. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw clenched, her eyes never left the envelope. The attorney requested permission to introduce the contents. The defense objected immediately. The arguments lasted nearly 30 minutes. Technical issues, procedural questions, Daffod-Hodgkin concerns. The kind of legal details most people never see in courtroom dramas. Eventually, after carefully reviewing everything presented to me, I made my ruling. The evidence would be admitted. I will never forget the silence that followed. Not a single person in that courtroom moved. The attorney slowly opened the envelope, then removed a small digital storage device. At first, many spectators looked confused. A flash drive, that was it? After all the anticipation, people expected something more dramatic, a contract, a confession, a photograph. But experienced trial lawyers know something important. The most powerful evidence often arrives in the smallest packages. The attorney handed the device to the courtroom technician. Within moments, it was connected to the evidence system. The screen remained blank. No images appeared, no documents, no videos. Just a simple audio icon. The attorney turned toward the jury, then spoke words that immediately changed the atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to hear is a recovered recording. The gallery became completely silent. Audio recordings carry a different weight inside courtrooms. People know they are about to hear real voices, real conversations, unfiltered moments. And those moments often reveal more than carefully prepared testimony ever can. The attorney continued, according to forensic experts, the recording had been recovered from an old mobile device previously owned by Judy Harper, a device believed to be permanently damaged years earlier. The data, however, survived, and apparently, so did the conversation. The defense objected again. vigorously, more aggressively than at any previous point during the trial. That reaction did not go unnoticed, not by me, and certainly not by the jury. Eventually, the objections were resolved. The courtroom technician pressed play. For several seconds, all we heard was static. Then voices emerged. At first, the conversation sounded harmless. Two women talking, friendly, relaxed. One voice belonged to Judy. The other belonged to Melissa. The jury listened carefully. So did I. The first few minutes seemed ordinary. Discussion about finances, medical bills, party concerns. Nothing remarkable. Then something changed. Judy began asking questions, specific questions. Important questions. Questions about paperwork. Questions about legal documents. Questions about ownership. And that was when the pattern emerged. Every time Judy asked for clarification, Melissa avoided giving a direct answer, not once. Repeatedly, the attorney paused the recording, then replayed several sections. The jury heard it again, the same behavior, again and again, deflection. Redirection, reassurance without explanation. One exchange immediately stood out. Judy asked, "Should I have another lawyer look at this?" The courtroom remained silent as everyone waited for Melissa's response. Then the recording delivered it. "No, that'll just create problems." The attorney paused, allowed the words to settle, then continued. A few minutes later in the recording, Judy expressed confusion about one section of paperwork. Again, she asked questions. Again, Melissa avoided answering directly. Instead, she focused on trust. "You trust me, don't you?" The question echoed through the courtroom. I noticed several jurors exchange looks because suddenly the emails from the previous day made more sense. The phone records made more sense. The timeline made more sense. Everything was beginning to connect. The recording continued. For nearly 40 minutes, the jury listened. And the deeper they went into the conversation, the more troubling it became. Then came the moment I will never forget, a moment that changed the trial forever. The attorney fast-forwarded to a later section. The timestamp showed the conversation occurred only days before Judy signed the transfer documents. The audio resumed. This time, Judy sounded nervous, worried, uncertain. She repeatedly asked what would happen to her home. And for the first time, Melissa sounded irritated, not supportive, not caring, irritated. Then Judy asked a direct question, a question so simple that it required only a yes or no answer. Am I giving up ownership? The courtroom froze. Everyone waited. Everyone listened. Melissa laughed, a short laugh. The same kind of dismissive laugh she had given inside my courtroom. Then she said something that immediately made several jurors stop writing. "You're worrying about the wrong thing." No answer, no clarification, no explanation, just avoidance. The attorney paused the recording, then turned toward Melissa. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, he asked a single question. "Mrs. Grant, is that your voice?" Melissa hesitated. For the first time during the trial, she genuinely seemed uncertain. Then she answered, "Yes." The word barely left her mouth. The attorney nodded, then continued playing the recording. What happened next would prove far more damaging than anything we had heard so far, because a second voice entered the conversation, a male voice unknown, unidentified, and within minutes that voice would expose a secret Melissa desperately hoped nobody would ever discover, a secret that threatened to destroy not only her defense, but her entire future. The instant the second voice appeared on the recording, I felt the atmosphere inside the courtroom shift. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody gasped. Nobody shouted. But something changed, because up until that point, the case had largely been about two women, Judy Harper and Melissa Grant, trust, friendship, Perry, manipulation. Now, suddenly, a third person had entered the story. and nobody knew who he was. The attorney allowed the recording to continue. The male voice sounded relaxed, comfortable, like someone speaking privately with a trusted associate. That detail immediately caught my attention. People reveal their true selves when they believe nobody else is listening. The conversation unfolded slowly. At first, the man asked general questions: how things were progressing, whether paperwork was moving forward, whether there were any problems. Melissa answered casually, almost confidently. Then came a sentence that instantly changed the mood inside the courtroom. The man asked, "Is she still trusting everything you tell her?" A silence followed, just a brief silence. Then Melissa laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly, comfortably, confidently. And she responded, "She trusts me too much." The room became still, completely still. I remember watching the jury. Several jurors immediately looked up from their notes. One woman in the jury box slowly lowered her pen. Another juror folded his arms and stared directly at the screen. Nobody wanted to miss what came next, because those 4 words carried enormous weight. She trusts me too much. Not enough, not somewhat. Too much. The attorney paused the recording, then replayed the statement again. The jury heard it twice. The defense objected. I overruled. The statement was relevant, extremely relevant, and Melissa knew it. For the first time since the trial began, I saw genuine concern on her face, not irritation, not frustration. Concern. The recording resumed. The male voice laughed, then asked another question. Do you think she'll ever figure it out? The courtroom became sibilant once more. Every person in that room knew they were about to hear something important. Melissa responded immediately, without hesitation, without caution, without realizing that years later, strangers would hear every word. Not until it's finished. I noticed the gallery react instantly. Several spectators exchanged looks. Others simply stared forward. The jury remained focused, but their expressions had changed. The confidence Melissa carried into court was beginning to evaporate. The attorney allowed the recording to continue for another minute. Then he stopped it. The timing was deliberate. A skilled trial lawyer knows exactly when evidence has landed. And this evidence had landed hard, very hard. Then came the question everyone wanted answered. Who was the man? The attorney approached the witness stand slowly, methodically. Then he turned toward Melissa. Mrs. Grant, do you recognize the second voice? Melissa hesitated. A long hesitation, far longer than any previous answer. Finally, she responded. Yes. The words sounded strained. The attorney nodded. Who is he? Another pause, longer this time. Then Thomas Reed. The name meant nothing to most spectators, at least initially. But the attorney wasn't finished. He displayed a photograph, a middle-aged man in a business suit. Then he identified him, Thomas Reed, real estate investor, Bratori developer, business associate. And according to financial records introduced during trial, a man who had been discussing Judy's property long before Judy realized ownership was at risk. The effect on the jury was immediate, because suddenly everything connected: the timeline, the emails, the phone calls, the recordings, the discussions, the planning, the pieces were fitting together. And when pieces fit together, stories become difficult to deny. The attorney then presented another exhibit. A series of messages exchanged between Melissa and Thomas. The defense fought desperately to keep them out, desperately. That alone drew attention. Jurors noticed desperation. Everyone does. After reviewing the evidence, I permitted selected portions to be shown. The first message appeared on the screen. It discussed property values, potential resale opportunities, projected profits, nothing inherently illegal, but the date caught everyone's attention. The message had been sent before Judy signed the transfer paperwork Several jurors immediately looked toward Melissa because the implication was obvious. Discussions about future profit opportunities were occurring before Judy fully understood what was happening. Then another message appeared, and another. Each one added another piece to the puzzle. Each one strengthened the plaintiff's argument. Each one weakened Melissa's position. The attorney approached the jury, then displayed a timeline beside the messages. I watched their faces carefully. Years on the bench have taught me that jurors often reveal when they finally understand a case. And I could see it happening. One by one, the realization spreading. Then came a message that changed everything. Even before it appeared on the screen, I noticed Melissa lower her head, as if she already knew what was coming. The message was short, very short. Only a single sentence, but some sentences are powerful enough to destroy years of carefully constructed lies. The attorney enlarged it, the courtroom screen illuminated, and everyone read the same words. Once she signs, it's over. The room became silent, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The attorney enlarged the rest of the message, and that's when the true impact landed. Once she signs, it's over. She'll never figure out what happened until it's too late. I will never forget that moment, not because of shouting, not because of emotion, because of the silence, complete silence. The kind of silence that follows undeniable truth. The kind of silence that arrives when an entire courtroom realizes they are witnessing the collapse of a carefully built story. Melissa's attorney looked defeated. The jury looked stunned. Judy looked heartbroken, and Melissa looked terrified. For the first time since the trial began, she seemed to understand something. The evidence was no longer merely raising questions. The evidence was answering them. Then something happened that nobody expected, not the attorneys, not the jury, not even me. A court officer approached the bench carrying a newly delivered document. I accepted it, reviewed it, then reviewed it again because what I was reading was difficult to believe. The information had arrived from investigators working on a completely separate financial inquiry, an inquiry involving Melissa Grant, an inquiry nobody in the courtroom knew about, at least not yet. As I continued reading, my attention sharpened because the information connected directly to the issues already being discussed in court. And what it revealed threatened to make Melissa's situation far worse than anyone imagined. I looked up from the document, then toward Melissa, and at that exact moment, she looked directly back at me. The expression on her face told me everything. She already knew. She knew exactly what those investigators had found. And she knew her world was about to change forever. I have delivered thousands of rulings during my career. Some were difficult, some were straightforward, some affected families, others affected businesses. But very few moments compared to the feeling of realizing a case is far bigger than anyone originally believed. That was exactly what happened when I finished reading the document delivered to the bench. At first, I thought it might be unrelated, a coincidence, a procedural matter, but the deeper I read, the more concerned I became. The information came from investigators conducting a separate financial review involving property transactions connected to Melissa Grant, and what they had uncovered was disturbing, very disturbing. The jury had not yet heard any of it. The spectators knew nothing about it. But Melissa did. I could see it in her face. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Even the frustration that had carried her through most of the trial had disappeared. What remained was fear, pure fear. The attorneys approached the bench. Arguments followed. Careful discussions took place outside the jury's hearing. Legal procedures had to be followed. Evidence had to be reviewed. Rules had to be respected. Eventually, a limited portion of the information was approved for presentation, And that is when the most shocking part of the trial began. The jury returned, the courtroom settled. Everyone sensed something significant was coming. The plaintiff's attorney stood and walked toward the center of the courtroom. He carried only a few pages, nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. But his expression told me everything. He knew exactly how important those pages were. He addressed Melissa directly. "Mrs. Grant, are you familiar with a woman named Rebecca Collins?" The reaction was immediate. Melissa froze, not for a second, not for a moment, for several seconds, long enough that everyone noticed, long enough that even spectators in the back rows could see it. Finally, she answered, "Yes." The attorney nodded, then displayed a photograph, a modest home, different neighborhood, different family, different property, yet strangely familiar. The attorney then revealed why. Rebecca Collins had experienced circumstances remarkably similar to Judy Harper: financial hardship, a close relationship with Melissa Bertorti discussions, paperwork, trust, and eventually loss. The courtroom became silent because suddenly this no longer looked like an isolated event. Suddenly it looked like a pattern, a very dangerous pattern. The defense objected repeatedly. Some objections were valid, others were not. But enough information reached the jury to raise serious questions. Questions Melissa clearly did not want asked. The attorney continued. Financial records showed communications between Melissa and investors connected to multiple properties. Some discussions occurred before property transfers were finalized. Others referenced anticipated profits, projected resale values, future opportunities. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Then came the moment that would later spread across social media, legal forums, and news reports, the moment people would refer to as the 5-minute collapse. The attorney approached Melissa one final time. The courtroom was silent. Every juror was watching. Every spectator was focused. Even court staff seemed frozen. Then he asked a question so simple that nobody expected it to matter. "Mrs. Grant, when Judy warned you yesterday that you hadn't seen the new evidence, why did you stop laughing?" The question hung in the air. Melissa said nothing. The attorney waited, still nothing. Then he asked again, "Why did you stop laughing?" The silence stretched 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15, an eternity inside a courtroom. Then Melissa finally spoke quickly, barely above a whisper, "Because I knew." The words landed like thunder. Several spectators gasped. The jury remained motionless. The attorney took one step forward. "Knew what?" Melissa looked down. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. Then something happened that nobody expected. Not the attorneys, not Judy, not the jury, not even me. Melissa began crying, real crying. Not controlled tears, not strategic emotion. Years of composure seemed to collapse at once. And then she said words that changed the entire trial. I knew the recording existed. The courtroom exploded with whispers. I immediately restored order. But the damage had already been done. The jury had heard it. Everyone had heard it. Melissa wasn't claiming the recording was fake. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't challenging authenticity. She admitted she knew it existed, which meant she knew exactly what it contained. The attorney asked another question, one final question, a devastating question. If you believed you had done nothing wrong, why were you afraid of that recording? Melissa covered her face. She couldn't answer. She simply couldn't answer. And sometimes the absence of an answer is more powerful than any response. The jury understood. I could see it. Every person in that room understood. The story Melissa presented at the beginning of the trial was gone, completely gone. The confident, fat Karen who entered my courtroom laughing had disappeared. In her place sat a frightened woman watching years of deception unravel in real time. Then came the final blow. Investigators confirmed that additional inquiries were now underway regarding financial activities connected to several property transactions. No conclusions had been reached. No accusations were being decided in my courtroom, but the implications were enormous. Melissa understood that, her attorneys understood that, everyone did. The legal battle over Judy's home was no longer the only problem she faced. Far from it. The attorney returned to his table. The evidence phase was over. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. And as I looked around that room, I realized something extraordinary. 5 minutes earlier, Melissa still had a chance to preserve part of her credibility. 5 minutes earlier, some jurors still had doubts. 5 minutes earlier, the outcome wasn't certain, then the truth arrived, and everything changed. The laughing stopped, the confidence vanished, the story collapsed, and now only one thing remained. The verdict, the final judgment, the moment when 12 ordinary citizens would decide whether Judy Harper would finally receive justice. And believe me, what happened when that verdict was read is something I will never forget. The morning of the verdict felt different. After more than 2 decades on the bench, I have learned to recognize certain atmospheres inside a courtroom. Some days feel routine, some feel uncertain, and some carry a weight that everyone can feel. This was one of those days. When I entered the courtroom, people were already waiting. The gallery was nearly full. Reporters sat quietly with notebooks in hand. Legal observers filled several rows. Even people who had never met Judy Harper seemed emotionally invested in the outcome, because by that point, the case was no longer just about a house. It had become something larger, a story about trust, a story about manipulation, a story about what happens when someone believes they are too clever to ever face consequences. Judy arrived first. She looked exhausted. But there was something different about her. Hope. For the first time since the trial began, I could see hope. Not certainty, not confidence, just hope. Melissa entered a few minutes later. The transformation was remarkable. The woman who had walked into my courtroom days earlier, laughing and smiling, was gone, completely gone. She looked older, tired, defeated. She avoided eye contact with nearly everyone. Even her own attorneys spoke to her only briefly, and throughout the morning she stared at the table in front of her, almost as though she already knew what was coming. Eventually, the jury informed the court that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom became silent. One of the strangest things about verdict moments is how quickly an entire room can stop moving. People stop whispering, stop shifting in their seats, stop breathing normally. Everyone waits. The jurors entered, took their seats, and handed the verdict form forward. I remember looking down at the document. The room was so quiet, I could hear pages rustling in the gallery. I reviewed the form carefully, then I began reading. The jury found in favor of Judy Harper on every major claim, every single one. The words seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, nobody reacted. Almost as if people needed time to process what they had heard. Then Judy lowered her head and began crying quickly, not dramatic tears, just relief. The kind of relief that comes after carrying a burden for far too long. The jury also awarded substantial damages. The property transfer would be reversed. Financial compensation would be awarded. Additional findings would be referred to the appropriate authorities for further review. The consequences were enormous, absolutely enormous. Melissa closed her eyes slowly, as though the weight of everything had finally become too much to carry. The house, the profits, the image she had built, the confidence she displayed, the control she believed she had. It was all slipping away. And the most striking part, nobody looked surprised, not the jury, not the attorneys, not the spectators, because by that stage, the evidence had spoken for itself. The verdict simply confirmed what everyone had already begun to understand. Then came my final remarks. To this day, I remember them clearly because I wasn't speaking only to the parties involved. I was speaking to everyone in that courtroom, and perhaps to everyone who would later hear about the case. I explained that legal documents matter, contracts matter, signatures matter. But trust matters too. In many ways, trust is one of the most powerful forces in human life. Families are built on trust. Friendships are built on trust. Communities are built on trust. And when trust is exploited for personal gain, the damage extends far beyond financial loss. It reaches into people's sense of safety, their sense of judgment, their ability to trust others again. I looked toward Judy, then toward Melissa, and I explained something I have learned after years on the bench. Most victims do not lose everything because they are foolish. They lose everything because they believed someone who seemed trustworthy. There is a difference, a very important difference. Judy was not sitting in that courtroom because she trusted too much. She was sitting there because someone chose to take advantage of that trust. That responsibility belongs to the person who committed the deception, not the person who believed it. The courtroom remained silent as I finished. No applause, no celebration, just reflection, the kind of reflection that follows difficult truths. After proceedings concluded, people slowly began leaving. Some approached Judy. Others spoke quietly among themselves. Several jurors lingered for a few moments before departing. Melissa remained seated longer than anyone else. For several minutes, she didn't move. She simply stared ahead, and I found myself thinking about the moment that started it all, the moment Judy issued her warning. You haven't seen the new evidence. 6 simple words. That's all it took. Melissa laughed. She believed she had already won. She believed the truth would remain hidden. She believed nobody would ever hear the recording. Nobody would connect the messages. Nobody would see the pattern. And then reality arrived. 5 minutes later, the confidence disappeared. The laughter disappeared. The illusion disappeared. Eventually, Melissa stood and left the courtroom, not smiling, not speaking, not looking back. The woman who entered believing she controlled the story was gone because the truth had taken control instead. Years have passed since that case. I have presided over many others, some more complex, some more tragic, some involving larger amounts of money, yet this one remains unforgettable. Not because of the property, not because of the verdict, but because of the lesson. The lesson is simple. People often believe intelligence can hide deception forever. It cannot. People often believe influence can erase consequences. It cannot. And people often believe that if enough time passes, the truth will simply disappear. It will not. The truth is patient. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes years, but eventually it arrives. And when it arrives, it does not need to shout. It does not need to argue. It does not need to force its way into the room. It simply stands there, quietly, clearly, impossible to ignore, and everything built on lies begins to fall apart. That is what happened to Melissa Grant. That is why this case stayed with me. And that is why, even now, I still remember the moment the laughter stopped, because in that courtroom, a woman who believed she was untouchable learned something every judge eventually sees. No matter how carefully a lie is constructed, the truth only has to win once. And when it does, it changes everything.